Welcome to APPA's 30th Town Hall entitled Changing Fall 2021 Reopening Strategies. My name is Billy Zadig, Manager Special Projects for APPA. Allow me to review a couple of housekeeping items before we start. All attendees are in listen-only mode. We ask that you utilize the chat box for the Q&A segment of this session. While we attempt to respond to all questions submitted, should we run out of time, responses will be posted to APPA's COVID-19 RAQ Recently Asked Questions webpage. We also remind participants to ensure their speaker volume level is set for your comfort. Our speakers are gathering us from across the continent, and as such, varying volumes will be present. Today's session will award professional continuing education credits as well as APPA's credentialing points and AIA CLUs. For APPA certificates, please email Billy at Billie, at appa.org, along with your AIA membership number if you have not done so in the past. Our webinar recording will be posted to the APPA website later this afternoon. Additionally, you will receive an email within 72 hours providing designated links to all webinar recordings, presentation slides, as well as information on upcoming webinars and town halls. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Lander Medlin, APPA's Executive Vice President, your moderator for today. Lander, take it away.
Thanks, Billy, and thanks both Suzanne and Christina for all three of your help in putting all these together as usual. And welcome all of you. We're going to have a great panel today, and we appreciate your engagement in these town hall meetings as we further explore the impact of our facilities organizations on the education enterprise. Thank you for joining the dialogue. That's what's so important here, because it makes it such a rich conversation and the special community we share. Now, preparing for fall 2021 may prove more complicated than the past two academic semesters. Two key unknowns: one, the extent of variant strains of SARS-CoV-2, and two, the level of vaccination of the campus community, which combined create their own complexities for educational facilities professionals and their institutions. Critical things like distinguishing between vaccinated and unvaccinated cohorts, maintaining monitoring and surveillance processes, and enforcing or not masking and physical distancing, all to ensure we provide a rich and robust learning and living experience that optimizes the health and safety of a fully occupied campus, which is what we all want, right? But it's a tall order for sure. That's why we chose this topic today, changing the fall 2021 reopening strategies. It's also why we chose this specific panel of experts who will provide their strategies and perspectives as we explore the best path forward for our facilities and institutions as a whole. Now, here's the format for today's town hall. It's a little bit different because there's some front matter that I think you will find important as well. I'm going to introduce the topic and provide a capsulized overview of ACHA's guidelines. That's the American College Health Association's guidelines that align with CDC. And then I'm going to give you a rundown of the results from our latest membership survey on this topic with some comparisons to last year's data set. I'll be using an infographic for that as we walk through, and then I'm going to give you a summation of the narratives. Then I'm going to recognize our stellar panel, each individually, and they will talk with you about what their experiences are and provide an opportunity for your questions. And then we'll conclude by highlighting some additional resources and closing remarks. Frankly, the disruption to higher education, K-12 and preparatory schools by this pandemic continues to eclipse all our prior experiences. And it's not over yet, not by a long shot. Now it's time for us to sort out how to lead and manage the new chaos and confusion from the latest relaxed masking and physical distancing requirements, plus the continued need for testing and contact tracing, HVAC ventilation and cleaning methodologies, all amidst the backdrop of people either vaccinated or unvaccinated. And, can't say this too many times, every institution will be different. Given the lack of universal requirements, so what practices and protocols, approaches and strategies should we consider employing to best manage and proactively respond on behalf of our institutions and its facilities? Now, in the end, let's not forget the outcome of the race between vaccinations and variants, which will significantly influence campus reopening plans this fall. Plans must include the possibility that we might not reach sufficient community herd immunity on campus. Okay, so let's now take a brief look at the latest ACHA CDC guidelines on reopening higher education institutions. So I want to look at what's happening here. The American College Health Association has a new guidance document called Considerations for Reopening Institutions of Higher Education for the Fall Semester. That's 2021. Now, the first slide just gives you an overview of some of the key points. So before the vaccine is widely available, not everybody is taking advantage of it. So herd immunity may actually be elusive, even though we know it's the best way to disrupt in transmission and reduce the disease. So if that indeed happens, the emergence of potentially more transmissible variant strains can necessitate the things that I've identified here. We may have to go, in some cases, as you hear from my panelists, are all different, and what they're doing, they have to really pivot back to these. So ensure that you have COVID-19 off-ramps. That's an important element to this. And then know your level of campus community vaccination to reduce risk of transmission. So Billy, let's go to the next one and we'll see what do they recommend. Now, I'm going to give you some of the approaches to consider, and it's based on several circumstances. So here are the scenarios. They certainly recommend that you require vaccination for all students. That's what they're looking for, and obviously they would be exemptions for medical contraindications, but indeed that's what they're recommending. Now let's look at this scenario. If required for all, they want you to do the things that are listed there, or at least put these in place. That's what they are suggesting. Now, if it's only for students, then you want to handle your strategies specifically designed for your students so that you're paying attention to that, which includes quarantine. Let's go to the next slide, and we're going to see that if vaccination is not implemented, I must suggest to you remain on heightened alert. Now, this is where the COVID off-ramps come into play. That heightened awareness to the possibility of transmission really does come into play, and you are going to want to continue with those mitigation strategies. All right. They also said if it's voluntary vaccination and you are yet requiring vaccine declination, and declination is really about showing that you have been vaccinated even though it's voluntary, definitely make sure that you've addressed with legal counsel and your governing body. That becomes very, very important to all of this. Your state may be weighing in on that as well, and so could your local health. So I cannot stress how important it is to continue to seek local, state, federal health department guidance. That becomes critically important. Okay, so let's look at this next slide. Now it's going to look busy as all get out, and because all I'm doing is giving you what I think is a sense of the content from the areas that the ACHA guidelines have covered. I went through this. It's a 37-page document. It's pretty easy to read, and so I've given you in italics what my sense is of the why and the what needed. So the details are in the document. I think you'll find it really helpful. And on this next slide, you will see that we have a link to that particular document, which I think is good. Again, it's a good, easy read. You may be able to use it to make your case for decisions by senior institutional leadership. Because frankly, we did hear that in narrative responses to our survey that does pose some difficulty. Okay, so let's move to the feedback or results that we received from the latest member survey that we did on reopening strategies. It's really been nice to read through. It's been let me tell you, you folks provide such great narrative, and you gave us some great data. There were close to 300 participants in it, and I think there's a cool story here, frankly. It's a success story on the one hand, and still a continuing nightmare about perception and funding on the other hand, right? And you're telling us that. Now, let me say success stories around no supply-related issues. At least that's what you're telling us right now. That was a serious issue, as you recall. last year. And then I think the other cool thing is that in December of 2020, when we were asking about HVAC, people were submitting responses that were actually, and catch this word, hypotheses, meaning they were going to try to do X and Y or Z. These things are now listed as best practices and or emerging practices that you're going to carry throughout. I think that is really great, and it's recognizing that you are carrying a level of confidence compared to the prior year. So I think that you ought to feel pretty good about it, and I think that I certainly feel really good about what's transpired here. So let's actually go to the infographic, Billy. I think we've got a series here. Let's look first at the data gathered through the demographic side. I think there's a nice distribution. All in all, by institutional type, yes, 4 years, 79%, but we had 14% from community colleges and 5% from the K-12 school district. And then the 4-year component type was nicely distributed as well, with small liberal arts at 23%. You would naturally recognize that 49% is research, and then the comprehensive doctorals at 24%. Then I look at the funding type. Pretty normal, 75% was public, 25% private. That's okay. It's a pretty nice distribution of these results. So let's take a look now at the in-person, hybrid, and remote. Now this is stark. It's expected, but it's stark. If you were to look at just spring or last fall, it was 0, but in spring it was only 15% fully open, right? You're going to reopen at, it says 82% right now. Now remember, some folks have yet decided whether they're going to fully reopen or not, but it's already a stark difference between where you were. And if you look to the far right at that fully remote online, you will see that the fall, right now we're logging in 0. Yet spring was at 16%. And then of course the middle range of hybrid. I think we're going to see several more that will do a lot of hybrid, but we were being pretty strict about fully reopen, hybrid, fully online. Okay, let's look at the student vaccinations. This becomes, I think, interesting, and it aligns with the Chronicle of Higher Education's data set. They have said that close to 500, the number I got last night was 488 institutions in their data set say that students will be required to have vaccinations before they enter campus. That's about what this data would tell us. But I think there are a lot of folks saying, still don't know, still to be determined, et cetera. But it says 31%, which is an interesting number here. Now, if we look at proof of vaccination here, although we said that, yes, vaccination will be required at 31%, only 25% will be asking for, quote, proof. That's the declination part that I mentioned earlier. And then finally, at the bottom of this is staff and faculty. That one is becoming very interesting. And the latest data from last night said that 20% will require it. That has not so far been the norm, but I think it has become a real bone of contention, but I do think that we'll see many changes across the summer as we get closer and closer to fall. Okay, let's look at the next one, Billy, and it's on face coverings. Face coverings, what should jump out at you is it says optional, okay? That's pretty standard out there that it's going to become optional given everything I just told you about vaccinated, unvaccinated, and whether you know what your community immunity looks like. But the others should pop out at you. Those others are, and I went through the detail, and those nuances really do exist. It's fluid right now. It depends, what some people said. It's to still be determined. They're just not sure. Others said there will be specific spaces that will be requiring. Now, if you're at a med ed, you're going to find that your health institutions are going to say you have to wear a mask. Okay, so it's getting, so they're doing a blend. And then it also, in many cases, it says relates to non-vaccinated. So even if it's, quote, optional or voluntary, if you're not vaccinated, they're going to be pressing for that. In the not required category, it's really about state decisions. And you can see the rest of it. Physical distancing. This is an interesting one as well. That first line, same setup as pre-COVID. That may relate to the availability of space. That could be an issue. But it also is recognizing where each institution is and where they're planning to go, because they're looking at a full fall reopening and everyone coming back. So there are some nuances under the other where it says 12%. And many of those are related to face coverings, okay? Are related to face coverings. You have face coverings, you're talking about not having physical distancing. So it's getting pretty interesting. I think it was fun to go through this. Okay, now let's look at testing and tracing, Billy. We've got testing and tracing and isolation and quarantine, which we've sort of put together here. The eliminated category, that's somewhat concerning. Please have your off-ramps. Please be prepared just in case, because that is concerning. At least it is to me, given what I know from the CDC and the ACHA. And the other, under 11%, spoke to symptomatics only. If someone is experiencing symptoms. Some others said it's to be determined or unknown. And same thing on isolation and quarantine. Again, I'm very concerned about totally eliminated, given the existing circumstances of variants and the unknowns. But the other category is that some said they actually never established them. Wow. I don't know how you did it, but you never established them. And others said to be determined or unknown. All right, PPE supplies. PPE supplies on this next slide is really fascinating, and we did it from the highest to descending order. But the correlations will come out nice in the narrative as well. Because we're having fewer checks, less thermometers, right? Because we are seeing face coverings go, most people have their own. That's another. These hand sanitizer in bottles, people have auto dispensers. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why many of these have gone an entirely different direction. Then if we look at the disinfecting side of this, clearly the winner here is electrostatic sprayers. People are using those. And now, guess what? They're using it and identifying it as an emerging practice. That's where they're going to go with these. UV and UV light systems, you'll see below when I go to HVAC upgrades. So you're going to see how these correlate to the narrative, and I'll give you a little bit more in a second. So Billy, let's go to that last portion of the infographic, and you can see what the cleaning standards will be. It's interesting to me how you've combined with pre-COVID. So many more folks are going to either continued or combined. The idea that we're discontinuing, whatever you do, people, communicate that, because the perception may be different on your campus, but whether you should, quote, discontinue. So just make sure you're communicating it. But COVID era protocols are now saying that we are going to enhance and increase high touch point cleaning, et cetera. So that's coming out of this, and I think it's becoming very interesting. And then the last of the infographic is these HVAC upgrades that were planned. No upgrades, you're going to hear about that today. We're going to, some folks talk about why, and there's some really great reasons why. MERV filters became the big thing, MERV 13s and 14s and above, and you can see where that went. But I know from all of our town halls, this is number 30, that existing buildings have trouble with the higher end MERV rated MERV filters. And so you've really had to manage that through other things like this UVC light systems and other sort of antimicrobial filters. I also want to add, other says 16%, that's HEPA units. Ionization and bipolarization, bipolar ionization units. It's increasing outside air supply and air changes. You've been doing that way more in the narratives that I'll get to in a second. So you can see where I was going with this. So if you were thinking about these particular numbers, I want to highlight PPE where it was reduced, and it dovetails beautifully with our long form responses, where people are adding more disinfectants and hand washing stations and hand washing liquids that go into stations on campus, and they don't need the bottles, okay? And that 3 items at the bottom of that list of paper products and Others, well, they come at us anyway, but the face covering, thermometers, bottles, I mentioned those. So, these have been optional, and so now you'll see what's happening. Okay, with the vaccine, the presumption is that masks are an additional protection, which they indeed are. And, less thermometers make sense. So more people are vaccinated. Temperature checks were meant to be a quick way to check COVID systems. Okay, symptoms, I'm sorry. So e-sprayers, I thought that was really interesting because it is listed as a new emerging best practice, and the COVID cleaning standards enhanced. So let's go to the narratives, because I want to give you just a few of those, as I think you will see. Single greatest need. Staffing. I get a smile out of my panelists on that one. Staffing, because that's been frustrating. And funding. Okay, I didn't put an exclamation point next to that one. But funding has been in two places, one for staffing and the other for HVAC requirements. And also, they listed other things, like their single greatest need is for people to issue a mandatory vaccination requirement. I doubt that's going to happen. I really doubt that's going to happen. We're not even doing it federally. But and then the unknowns are causing a great deal of fear. You want to try to know the status of your community's herd immunity. You'll hear about that today from our panelists. Really looking for clarity here, folks. You want clarity from your senior institutional leadership, from the guidelines, trying to give you some of that information so that it will help things be clearer for you, and then the HVAC requirements as well. If anyone isn't concerned about their student enrollment numbers, be concerned about your student enrollment numbers. You are a recruitment and retention entity. That's what Space and Place is all about. So please, that's who you are and what you're about. So student enrollment numbers are important to this whole deal. And we'll talk about more of that on September 27, because we are going to go at student enrollment unrelentingly. I mean, we're just unapologetically, because I need to get folks paying attention, because there is an enrollment cliff. Okay, different topic. All right. HVAC, emphasis on vaccine efficacy. Someone actually wrote this down, and it was very important to me, because vaccine efficacy is way better than any of the other risk mitigation strategies that we have in place. So your opportunity to educate and communicate that is critical. So Billy, let's go to the COVID era protocols. In your open-ended responses on protocols, I have highlighted those little funny asterisks, those ones that have the asterisk double and in red. They were also stated in your emerging practices, okay? I really liked that, and I wanted to make sure that you knew about that. You have been wanting to reduce and not collect trash in private offices forever. Use it as your opportunity, folks. You have it. Grab onto it, okay? You are talking about using these virtual platforms and flexible hybrid telework to your advantage now. You know how it works. You know how it can work for you. Here's a way to pivot, right? Really important. The employing more frequent high touch and hand sanitizing, that really relates to the PPE data that I talked about. And these enhanced protocols, it is clear to me that they are staying with us. If you aren't paying attention to a healthy environment and a healthy building focus, I know Lalette loves to hear that. He is the chair of our Healthy Smart Building Initiative. That is going to be here to stay, and we are going to need to pay attention to it. Okay, so the last three are about these help during flu influenza season. Why am I saying that? If you can increase touchless fixtures, if you can have masking continue, if you can do this into the late fall and winter, you didn't hear about flu and influenza, not because the pandemic was so horrible. It was almost negligible. There's a reason. It's because we were masking and physical distancing. So please pay attention to how you might be able to use these things from the pandemic as an opportunity to pivot and seize these changes and make them stick now. Okay, so let's look at our last slide, and then I want to go to my panel. The last slide is about those emerging practices. Remember, they duplicated from the other, and I did not put those duplicates. But I really liked utilizing DocuSign. People were emphatic about This helps, man. It helps with the contracts moving faster, procurement moving faster, and anytime we can do that in our processes to make things quicker, faster, easier, and streamlined is awesome. You also were doing some of this touchless stuff with foot-operated power doors and things, and a lot of people wanted to centralize shipping. You're doing it. The second shift cleaning, increasing it, all inspections, all these things are important. And I think you have recognized that for your healthy environment and healthy building responsibility. Also, if I were to highlight this one, I'd highlight 14 times from Sunday, but increasing communications and collaboration. You said it, I've said it, let's say it again. It's a must do. We cannot go back to the silos that exist on our campuses. It absolutely will not help us moving forward. And then Paulette, you got to be happy about that building health and healthy smart building team. People are implementing these. They're moving forward with them. This wasn't just me putting them, okay? And this whole idea of increasing HVAC air changes, filtration, filter replacements, preventive checks, systematic upgrades, CO2 monitoring, HEPA units, and UV sanitation is all getting us to places that we want to go. And our folks probably have some really, I know they're going to have some really good questions about this as well. Okay, we're off of that and we're on to our panel now. So let's get at it. And let me reinforce that this does not close. The survey does not close until Monday night, June 14, 10 o'clock. We'll have a new updated infographic. You can get every one of the raw survey data. And I'm telling you, talk about community. Your folks have given you some great ideas. So please use those and take them to advantage. All right, Lalit Agarwal, Director of Maintenance Utility Services, University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Lalit began his career as a computer analyst at UNL in 2000 as part of a team that designed and developed UNL's proprietary building automation system. As facilities needs have morphed, Lalit has taken an increased responsibility for all campus building maintenance, utility infrastructure, and energy management. His Bachelor of Engineering degree in Mechanical Engineering and an MBA. Lalit is an active contributor to APPA. Lalit, please set the stage for us with some of the key decisions you made and are sticking to, along with your behavioral messaging approach. Lalit?
Thanks, Lander. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to share Nebraska's story. You did a great job covering all the salient points ahead of even the panel, so I don't even know if the panel is needed here. But from the University of Nebraska standpoint, some of the answers that you saw on survey results, we did land on one side or the other on what we ended up deciding. So for example, vaccinations are not required on our campus, but they are highly encouraged. We live in Lincoln City, which is part of Lancaster County, and the university has partnered very closely with the county health department, and the county overall has an average vaccination rate of 62-63%, and it is much higher in the higher age groups. I mean, as high as 87% in 80+ population, and it's the age 16 to 24, and now that Pfizer is available for 12 to 15. Those are the two population groups that we are below 50%, but otherwise, overall, the city and county are pretty high in terms of vaccination rates. We have had some vaccination clinics on campus that were put in place to make it easy for students and staff to get their vaccinations without having to go too far. So those have been successful. Senior leadership in the university has done a really good job managing that process. That said, we still have some that have not been vaccinated, but as of 2 weeks ago, we took away the mask mandate from our campus, where people who are vaccinated are no longer required to wear a mask or social distance anymore. People who are not vaccinated are expected to still wear a mask and social distance. We used to have signage all over the buildings that basically said social distance, wear a mask, and all that. We actually removed that signage, and we came up with new signage which basically says now that if you are not vaccinated, please protect yourself by wearing a mask and social distance. So it's more of a nudge than a push. It's more of an encouragement approach that we are taking. There are certain spots on our campus where we do have more public access, like our museum on campus, where the museum is taking a little more behavioral approach, where those signs that we have in some places on rest of the buildings, there is probably 2 to 3 times those signs that are put in the museum, just because there is public accessing those spaces. And the other thing that the museum staff is doing, for example, is the staff themselves are keeping their masks on, just as a visual, as a reminder that if you're not vaccinated, we are still not completely over this pandemic, and we need to protect ourselves and our fellow citizens. So that's the mask and vaccination approach. I don't know if you're going to go and come back to HVAC and other areas that we can discuss at a later time.
You can do some of that right now, because I think that you've got some interesting approaches that will differ from some other folks, and I think that would be great.
Sure.
If you're okay with that, Lalit.
Yeah, no, I definitely can. From a cleaning point of view, we are scaling back those enhanced cleaning approaches to at least those private offices. We are going back to normal cleaning processes, but we are continuing to maintain those higher cleaning standards in those common areas and high touch point areas. Our hand sanitizer stations have been scaled back just because of the overburden that we had on the operations team to keep them topped up and maintain the status of filling them. And the reason is because we are finding out that they're not getting as much used. So we have been scaling that back. Again, the idea is that we are ready to put them back in if needed. We've learned so much over the last 15 months that if we needed to pivot again, we are ready to pivot and go back. We have some wellness stations inside those classrooms that we are not removing, at least. So we are not actively filling them up, but we are not removing them. People who are using them up can call us and we'll come back and refill them as needed. As far as HVAC go, we have had pretty good HVAC systems in most of our buildings. There were about 50% of the buildings that were below MERV 13s, and during the pandemic, we increased them to MERV 13s at least. And the other thing we did along with that is we didn't go 100% fresh air, or we didn't increase air changes, but we increased the amount of fresh air we take based on ASHRAE 62.1 standard. We doubled the minimum fresh airs. Between MERV 13 upgrades and looking at increased outdoor air, we're probably looking at about $50,000 to $80,000 extra cost on an annual basis, but that is less than 1% of our utility costs. And based on all of those probably are some of the things that will stay permanently. In fact, if you go from a 2-inch filter to a 4-inch filter and do the total cost of ownership analysis, there's actually a chance that those MERV 8 filters were more expensive in the number of times you had to replace them compared to a 4-inch MERV 13 would be. So we're looking at that as a permanent solution in the long run for our campus, and most likely we may not go back from it, even though there is some increased energy cost that goes with it. So those are the few things we did. We never went with bipolar ionization. We never installed UV protection. There is one building, it's the dental college in our campus, that did want to add the bipolar ionization, and we are in process of doing that. And that's just because they have those recovery rooms and medical type facilities that may have that. It's more from a let's be ultra conservative and ultra risk averse approach that we are taking in that one particular facility. So that's in a nutshell the story at Nebraska. We did have a lot of students on campus. Even in fall 2020, we did take a hybrid approach, and there were quite a few people on our campus that did come in person. Spring 21 was a little more, and fall 2020 we removed some furniture from some of the rooms to increase those social distancing spaces. We are putting them back during summer now, so when fall 2021 comes around, we will actually be back to full capacity. So anyway, that's in a nutshell what we have done at Nebraska, and we can discuss more as questions come in, Lander.
That's excellent, and we will have questions on MERV ratings and air exchanges, etc. I know we have some other, we'll have all four panelists, and I'll come back to that. So Michael Armida, stick with me, because that's how we'll do this, all right? So let me now go to Dan Levering. He is presently the Assistant Director of Custodial Services and Campus Special Events at Williams College. We're also highlighting he is maybe interim executive director, but I could be advancing the ball too quick. If that's my bad, then that's my bad, not Dan's. Okay, so let me just say that. But Dan started at Williams College in 2005 as a chef in dining services. He worked his way up through dining services into management, where he then transitioned over to the facilities operations department. Dan has been in facilities operations for 7 years now, providing oversight for the custodial department, grounds, conferences, and campus special events. Dan attended Paul Smith College for Culinary Arts and Service Management. Dan, among the many things that you're going to share, please share your experience with a high-end rural-based college located in the Berkshires and the interesting limitations that exist in that environment, as well as the other things that you'll talk about. Okay, Dan?
Hi there. Thank you very much, Lander. I'm glad to be part of the panel. Some of the challenges that we faced, obviously, are some geographical challenges. We are in the mountains. It can be very difficult to get supplies and deliveries and things of that sort, and everybody sort of forgets that there's a other half of Massachusetts beyond Worcester, and they often question why we don't sound like we're from Massachusetts. Well, we're not from Boston, but so those were definitely some challenges that we ran into, was just sourcing products and getting it, among many other things. But I know early on in the pandemic, everybody was facing those issues of supplies. Sort of spurring off of that, as we open up in the fall and looking at some of the PPE supplies, one of the things that we are going to continue putting out there is hand sanitizer, because we scooped up what we could get at the beginning of the pandemic, and we have a lot left over, as I'm sure a lot of people do. You know, we just put our hands on whatever we could get, because it was pretty uncertain there for a while on what the supply chain was really going to look like. Sort of going off of some of the things that Lalit had mentioned, one of the things we're considering is rolling back some of the cleaning protocols that we normally do. Right now, we're following the CDC recommendations. And here in Massachusetts, on May 29th, the governor rolled back most, if not all, of the COVID restrictions. So that really sort of helped us make our decision and solidify our decision for what the fall is going to look like. As far as vaccinations go, here at Williams, we are requiring the students to have vaccinations, as well as faculty and staff, unless you have a health concern, a health reason why you can't get it, religious beliefs or strongly held beliefs. And based on our numbers, if we have all of our student population vaccinated and 50% of our fact staff population vaccinated, then we'll hit that 80% herd immunity, which really opens up a lot of options for us. So we're very excited about that. Right now, it looks like we're on track to hit that number if we haven't hit it already. Signage, we're starting to decommission a bit as we're advancing towards the fall. As you had mentioned, Lander, the COVID off-ramp, you know, that's been a bit of a transition here in Massachusetts. On the 29th, when the governor rolled everything back and sort of blew the doors open, it was still a little bit of a shock for everybody. There's sort of the two crowds, one that's very ready to throw the mask aside and get back to normal, and then everybody else that's been dealing with this for 15 months. And, you know, we're not quite ready to just jump right in both feet. So as we've been working forward from the 29th, we're starting to remove our stickers and signage and stuff. The furniture is coming back on campus. That's been another challenge, and as we're getting ready for the fall, excited to see all of our stuff coming back. Classrooms looking like real classrooms again. So that's all been going good. I touched a little bit on PPE, the hand sanitizer. As I said, we're going to be putting out, obviously, again, masks, sort of just using up some inventory that we have. Sanitizer wipes, we did purchase a number of those to get us through and cover in some of the staffing gaps where that would sort of cover us on light labor situations. And we found that the students barely use them, if at all. So we still have a number of those to use up and find a home for. As far as HVAC, we are going to be changing our filters over to doing another change of MERV 14 this one last time, and then sort of reassessing in the fall to see what CDC guidance is, see what ASHRAE guidance is, and so on and so forth. So we're just going to keep monitoring that situation. I'm trying to think of what else. Are there other things you'd like me to cover, Lander?
You've done a great job, Dan, and I think that I want to give you credit for that phrase COVID-19 off-ramps. I stole that from you. The intro, as I liked it so much, I had heard about on-ramps and off-ramps way back over a year ago and had forgotten about it. So I did get that from you. Thank you. And that fact that you're hitting the 80% herd immunity opens up so many more possibilities. I really think that's an interesting element that is going to can you identify just a couple of things that you think it does for you in terms of hitting that? Because it might encourage people to encourage themselves so that they could do the same.
Sure. I think the biggest thing, it starts to open up our campus a bit more when we talk about overnight guests. Again, we had pulled that back. So students being able to have friends on campus. It reduces our need for, or eliminates our need for distancing, which is fantastic. Gosh, I'm trying to think on the spot here.
No, that's awesome. And frankly, you know, what you're highlighting to me is about that community. You know, you have such a culture of community. I'm very aware of that. It is about those connections, and it's about being able to be together. And by doing that, you are gonna just, that's gonna launch so wonderfully. So that's really exciting. So thank you, Dan. I really appreciate that. And you may have others that pop in your head that you want to say as we get, you know, even into the Q&A. Okay, so do not hesitate. All right. Williams is a high-end college. If anybody doesn't know about it, pretty high-end. Don't you have a helicopter pad there as well? It's some, I don't know what you have, but it's crazy. 450 acres, right? So
we do 450 acres. We do not have a helipad. At least there might be hiding it somewhere, but
okay. Well, for some reason in my brain you had a helipad. Maybe Win Wassenaar told me that years ago just to show off or something. Who knows? Okay. All right. I'm going to go to Kevin Harris. Kevin, I think you're with us. And you can go on screen if you would, and it's okay if you can't because, Kevin, tell me that you're on.
I am on. I thought I was sharing my screen. Thought you could see me, but I could see me, but I guess you cannot.
Okay, very good. That's awesome. They said yes, and the panel has spoken. All right, so here we go. Kevin Harris is Senior Director of Facilities Management Operations at Northwestern University. Kevin leads a team of 500 employees and contractors to deliver safe, reliable, and cost-effective utility plant engineering, maintenance, capital projects, compliance, and facilities management services. His operational accountability includes over 200 buildings across 16 million square feet on a 240-acre campus in Evanston, Illinois, and then a 25-acre campus in downtown Chicago. Kevin came to higher education from the corporate sector, previously as Vice President and General Manager for Facilities Management for BP, and I think you were actually at Amoco at one point, among other positions where you were delivering high leadership and a high leadership profile and a lot of technical support. He earned his master's degree in mechanical engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology and a bachelor's degree from Howard University. And it's funny, but on the question chat room, they said, go Emmys. All right. And an MBA executive management from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. Kevin, please provide us with your perspective on the strategies you have and will continue to employ that are working so well in your particular environment. Kevin?
Sure. So thanks for having me. It's good to be here. I apologize I had to come in a bit late. I had some other meetings I had to wrap up. So like many of you, we've paid really close attention to CDC as well as other authorities, including ASHRAE, and we've had some external counsel as well once the pandemic began and throughout the process. And so cleaning protocols were tightened. Like everyone else, we use CDC approved cleaning materials to do all of our cleaning. We've enhanced that quite a bit. And really right now, we're beginning to shift back towards more of a normal situation. And so as we move into the new fiscal year, which for us is going to be September, so that the school year, for the most part, we're going to revert back to normal cleaning standards. We will continue to disinfect high touch spaces. And so that will continue on. But in terms of office cleaning, that's going to revert back to normal standards. And because that's not really a high risk area anymore. Corridor cleaning will revert back to normal standards. We will increase some cleaning in our labs that are above what we did before the virus hit. So that's what's going to be happening there. Illinois had a five-phase program where phase 5 is a fully reopened. And so we just hit phase 5 officially as of this morning. It was announced. And so what that means for Illinois, and therefore all the cities within Illinois, is they have the ability now to fully reopen. And fully reopen here means no more capacity limits for major venues, sporting events, festivals, classrooms, etc. No mask requirements, although they do encourage people who are not vaccinated to wear a mask. And social distancing will revert back to normal. That there is some caveats to that. Hospitals will continue to require masks. Some public schools might require a mask, but in general, they'll kind of revert back to a normal environment. So they've had a very paced and methodical method of going about it. And then each city will have their own standards. They can fully reopen, or they can have a slower pace as well. With the university has more or less followed the guidelines of the city and state, and so they remain in step with that, which I think has been good. And so, which has been very conservative. The state and many of those who follow the state received a lot of controversy and a lot of criticism for being very slow to reopen. Yeah. But I think in the end it was the right decision given the levels of hospitalization and infection. At the university during the COVID pandemic, we, like many of you, required our students to be vaccinated. And required our students to go through and do regular testing, and that continues. They will look into that policy probably after commencement, which is next week, to see what we're going to do going forward. But for now, that's still in place where all students have to be tested once a week. Faculty and staff, it's voluntary. We are going into a program starting in FY22 where all students will need to be vaccinated, and the jury's still out if they're going to require that of faculty and staff. But I expect those announcements will be made in the next few weeks or so. In terms of ventilation, as I mentioned, we spent a lot of time with CDC and ASHRAE, and there's several other 4, 5, and 6 letter acronyms that we've researched. And what we chose to do is do a ventilation policy. We're running all of our ventilation units as close to as possible to the design standards. We have a lot of different kinds of ventilation units, a lot of ages of our ventilation systems, and our buildings are, from very new to over 100 years old. And so shifting to a standard MERV filter really wasn't a viable outcome for us because we have some units that can't take the higher MERV ratings. We did not put in UV systems that were already there. We just ran the systems according to their the design standards as best we could. So we didn't want to increase ventilation flow or decrease it too much. We didn't want to create mold issues by shutting down, putting in full outside air. So that's what we chose to do, and for us, it's worked out pretty well. We mentioned in our pre-call that I think as we go forward, one of the things the industry will begin looking at is, the design standards are really around how can you use as much mechanical air as possible in a building, and therefore not have open windows. Because of this pandemic, I think we'll begin to challenge that a little bit. We'll see how it plays out, but our most efficient buildings do not allow you to open the windows and bring in outside air. We want to bring that air in mechanically, filter it, and do other technologies that really minimize ventilation. And I think that we'll see if that gets challenged as we look at sustainability and how that might put some pressure on having more outside airflow. Masks, we've required masks in all of our facilities and on campus. As I mentioned, we're moving to phase 5 today, but as of now, we still require masks for everyone inside of all of our buildings, and that'll get reassessed probably sometime next week after commencement. We're a quarter system, so our commencement's going to happen later next week, which I think is also the right decision, given where we are. I think it's okay for us to wait a week to get some more insight. So as we go into FY22, we have a reopening plan. We're bringing all the faculty and staff back to campus. Obviously, all the students will come back to campus, and we're gonna move forward. But I think we are going to be in a do, learn, do as we look at how does remote work operate and where it doesn't. How do we manage all of our systems and facilities? Things such as offices where everyone's supposed to be back, but will they really all come back at the same time, at the same pace? So we're going to do a lot of learning, I think. But I think for now, our view is we're going to be fully reopened as of September 1, when the new school year more or less begins, and we're going to manage it accordingly and do our best to keep our incident rates to a minimum, if not at zero, if at all possible.
That's fantastic. I so appreciate it, Kevin. You're right. You're there. I just need to move my little arrow over. I learn something every time I do one of these. After maybe 100, I'll figure it all out. And then we'll be back to reopening, and you won't even want these. So very cool what you're doing. I did love this do, learn, do, as the panel knows from the dry run. Because I think that is illustrative of what's going to happen here, that we're going to do some things, we're going to learn, we're going to do some more things, and we're going to keep learning. And that's what I think I love about this community, is you're all so open to the learning. And I'm sad that you took criticism for being so concerned, but I think that was, you did the right thing, and you're benefiting from it. Now, folks, I want you to see, participants, there are differences between what was being described as one approach to this HVAC and then another, and it's really been fascinating to hear this. We'll delve into this a little bit more, but I want to go to Keith Woodward. Keith is no stranger to the screen. Keith Woodward is our Associate Vice President, Facilities Operations, Quinnipiac University, and Chair APPA Thought Leaders Series. Keith manages the day-to-day operations of 190 employees, over 3.1 million square feet and 750 acres of property on 3 campuses in 2 towns. So we got 2 of you with that. Keith's responsibilities include creating a culture of facilities success and making sure the operations staff understand the importance of delivering on a positive student and community experience when on campus. In addition, Keith co-chairs the University Emergency Management Team and previously served on the university's Center for Excellence Board for over a decade. Keith, please bring this home for us, as we recognize there are lots of one-offs, and any protocols must be based on your specific institution's needs and local situation. Keith?
Thanks, Lander. And thank you to the APPA community, and especially thank you to all the ARAPA and APPA people who are texting me right now during this event going on. That's like the real special part, so thank you. So let me also thank our institution, Quinnipiac, our president, Judy Oli, and our CFO, Mark Verholick in South Florida, who I work for, all of which are big supporters of APPA, which I think is really, really important to be part of this community. So I'm appreciative of every opportunity, so thank you. So let me just talk briefly. I won't talk a little bit. I'll try and talk differently about different topics than maybe have been brought up previously. First and foremost is, I think what's interesting about the APPA surveys that they sent out, you'll recall they sent out one mid to late July, one in early November, and the most current one that just came out. there's a clear, when you really kind of break those down, there's really a clear, a couple clear points, and I'm just going to touch on one of them in the interest of time, but how there's a yearning for clear guidance at the local and state and federal and CDC levels, right? And so as all of that takes place, and Lander mentioned the American College of Health Association with her opening remarks, we really want guidance, and we want consistent guidance is what we want. And through the last 15 or 16 months, there have been moments of tidal waves of guidance and tidal waves of we're not sure what we're doing. But particularly proud of the group, in particular, in facilities across the platform, generally speaking, how we've navigated that, right? Because navigating those waters was not always easy, right? Getting filters right away was not necessarily easy. Getting hand sanitizer right away was not relatively easy. So I think we've navigated those waters pretty well, and I think that stands as a test to the group, the facilities profession, I think is as a positive overall. And so when I wasn't surprised, and I never am, when you see funding and staffing listed as top priorities, right? Like no one ever says, "Oh yes, give me. I don't need any. I'm all set. Thanks." You know, it's not like dessert. You can't. You always want a little bit more than what you have. But I do try and fall back on kind of those some principles, which is try to always think innovatively about solutions, and trying to be creative about getting to the bottom of them, and try and in those solutions try and be student centric, and try and think about how this impacts the student, and always approach it with a mindset of gratitude and positivity. And nothing has tested that more than the last 16 months in terms of trying to hit on those particular points. So I do think it's the landscape is hard out there because there are so many varieties of what's going on, right? I mean, you've got Tulane University, which will pay $500 to employees to show that they're fully vaccinated, and you've got other state institutions that are not requiring that you can't show proof of that. So there are varying ways to do things, and I think that kind of confuses the higher education community in some way, because there's, oh well, look what the University of Georgia is doing versus look what the school in Florida is doing, and it's not picking on any particular school. I could use my own school as an example, as how we all approach these things. So we all approach them a little bit differently, which sometimes leads to some of these conversations. So to make sure that you feel like you're on the right track with what you do. I will say that if you haven't seen it, the CDC came out with some guidance about last week about higher educations. They kind of updated those, offering ways to promote the vaccination, offering ways to handle when everybody isn't vaccinated, when everybody is vaccinated, and other general considerations. It's much like Lander recommended, the American College Health Association. I'd recommend that you take a look at that if you can. It's probably a good document just to kind of review. And I mean, the good news is, 20% of the world, according to the New York Times this morning, has at least one shot of the vaccine. So it's slow, but we're getting there. I think that will have an impact on our international community arriving on campuses. And when we talked about enrollment, and Lander touched on that in the very beginning. The one-offs you mentioned, I think I think that's what we all struggle with. And I think I said this maybe in one of the other, when I was a panelist one or two other times, it's the one-offs, it's the understanding your institution has a variety of students and learners. It's not just all undergraduate and graduate. There's remote, there's various different needs. There's 2-year programs, there's 3-year programs. What about the students learning off campus at a hospital? What about blah, 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 blah. There's a ton of different things you need to think about when making some of these decisions. But it is the one-offs, I think, that will be the ones that drive you to crazy. So if you can try and answer those questions when you're making some of these decisions about vaccines and so forth, I think that definitely helps. I think our big lessons are, no surprise to this group, wipes in plumbing in 1960 buildings really don't go well together. I think that's not a surprise to too many people. I think we are learning a lot about the supply chain management in terms of what's out there for supplies. We're starting to see that in some things like life safety issues. We've met with our life safety folks, contractors, and they're starting to see little upticks in cost and a little uptick in delays. So we're trying to jump on that. The filters have been mentioned. We've ordered all of our filters for the year already. So we have them. So there's not going to be a shortage. I'd also caution you about water that you've turned off for some period of time. Make sure you run that, and make sure that has, I mean, we did that with all of our, our hydration stations or, water fountains, whatever. Let's, be safe and be careful with things of that nature. I think would be a help as well. And similar to, just to kind of give a quick synopsis, similar to what everybody else says, we are requiring vaccines for our students and our staff. We do have exemptions, which are previously mentioned. We do have a student population here during the summer. We are allowing overnight guests for them to do that. We do have no masks on campus if you're outside, masks if you're on campus inside. And certainly meetings and gatherings, at least small gatherings, are kind of on a ratio of, hey, if you feel comfortable and you're vaccinated and you want to take off your mask, you can do so. If you don't feel comfortable, keep it on, and that's fine. And we're doing similar to what I think many have said. We're working on bringing us back to normal with taking down signage and doing all of those things. So I know people have questions, so I don't want to harp on all of those things, but we're doing many of the similar things that everybody else has already mentioned.
That's excellent, Keith. I really appreciate it. You did bring it home, and that consistency, has been difficult. Having done 30 of these, it has certainly been a continued issue, and part of it is because we're learning. It's the science behind it, and we're all learning. So we have to sort of pick a horse and ride it and get moving on it. So these are really great points, and I really appreciate it. I do appreciate, too, the fact that you identified the wonderful nature of this community. I mean, I've been with it all my work life, it looks like. And I love this community. There's just something about these folks. You share, you care, you really give it 100%. And I think that's awesome. Okay, so can I go to one of the first questions we got? Surprise, and it's on HVAC related stuff, but I'm going to get to physical distancing and what you're doing too, because I know some of you have some answers, and that is around, and I think Lalit and Kevin, you may want to field this. Lalit, it's what, with the increase in MERV ratings, aren't we reducing air changes? Because I talked about all of that. It was a compilation of the information we got, but can you speak to that specifically?
It depends. I mean, if your system does not have the capacity to push the air with a higher resistance on those higher filter ratings, then yeah, there is that risk that you would be reducing the air changes. So you should be careful. I think Kevin made that point that some of the buildings that they have on their campus did not allow for that. We have one building, our music building was also having that same challenge. So we did not upgrade the filters there because we couldn't. But yeah, that is definitely a risk, and you need to make sure that your systems at least can run to design as Northwestern was doing, if not increased outdoor air and higher filtration. Very
good. Kevin, do you want to add to that? Or do you want me to ask?
I think Lily covered that. I would say that that was our reason behind not shifting to the higher MERV ratings, because if we do put in filters that are not designed for that system, you create other problems in the system. And so, we want to be very careful especially as the pandemic began. There was always a new solution to take out the virus. And, we want to be just really mindful that we didn't just jump at things. But there are some buildings where we do use the higher MERV ratings, but there's some we don't because we cannot.
One thing I would add, Lander, before we move off that topic, is that one building that we did have that we could not do that with we ended up asking the department to get some portable units in those higher occupancy spaces where they were able to plug it into the wall and let the more filtration happen within the space. So
Okay,
there were some other mitigating solutions there.
Okay, that's good to know, because in the data that we got from the open-ended narratives that talked about fresh air practice, we know that that's something we do in the spring, summer, even early fall, but how are you folks accommodating fresh air now in all seasons? Any of you, where are you headed with that? Lalit, you're leaning
I
in.
can kick off, yeah. So University of Nebraska has always used ASHRAE 62.1 standard to measure and modulate our fresh air intake. And most of our systems, if not all, were already programmed to bring in based on that type of program inside the building, the type of space. We were running the system based on those ASHRAE standards. During our COVID response, we doubled the amount of fresh air compared to the ASHRAE 62.1 standard. And as you all already know, it's one of those things, fresh air is great for indoor air quality, but it's not so good for energy costs, especially in those extreme weather where Nebraska is a great example. During Winter Storm Uri, we were down to 30 below zero, and I'm sure within the next few days we will be looking at 110 degrees. So we have a complete spectrum of temperatures here. So in those extreme temperatures, running those units with more outdoor air is actually going to be more expensive. But as I said, overall, in grand scheme of things, if you design your systems right, and most of our systems are a little over-designed, which is turning out to be beneficial for us in this particular scenario, where we are able to still increase our filtration and still run those systems a little harder. But we are basically sticking with ASHRAE standards to answer your original question in terms of fresh air intake. We are just doubling the amount, at least for near foreseeable future.
Okay, very good. So that would be a way to communicate it. And certainly, Keith, can you speak to some of that? The question is about how are HVAC perceptions or actions being communicated? You know, that becomes a different one, I think. It's the whole communication and messaging side of this. Can you give us some insight on that? Would you like to? Oh, I think you unmute.
That helps. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So certainly in the beginning, that was a significant issue. For us, it really hasn't been an issue since then. But I think what everybody is saying is if you build the design, if you use it to design standards of the piece of equipment, I mean, that's what it's designed for, right? Like, so we did increase our MERV ratings on a couple of them. We did have concerns in the very beginning, whether it was going to work or not and function properly, energy usage aside. But we did have some of those concerns, but they seem to have worked out okay. You got to keep up with your filter changes. You got to keep up with, all the operational stuff. But essentially, if you are using it as it's designed, I don't know how you can go wrong.
Okay, that's excellent. And I think that really is a very powerful message. And I think all four of you are homing in on that, that you're sticking with standards, that you done the work to get to make sure your systems are operating in that way. And so it's very clear. It was interesting as part of this, Kevin, you may have unions. I don't know. There were any issues with unions around this? Because I'm not sure who has unions on this from a panel, but we can find out. Any issues with unions, Kevin?
Yeah, we do have unions on all of our campuses. And no, we did not. We had a lot of good communication as this was happening. I think a lot of schools manage it differently with their trade staff. The way we manage it with our trade staff who are union and their university employees, particularly when the pandemic first began, is we sent home all non-critical staff. We did have critical staff that had to be at the campus, for example, people in our utility plant, for engineers and electricians. Everyone else we sent home and we had them do training. We had just a long list of online training for people to do, whether it's, soft skill training, hard skill training, et cetera. And then we brought them back on campus to begin resuming operations which was in the June timeframe of last year. So with that, we didn't have any issues with our union. We treated them fairly. They worked really hard to keep the campus up and running. Lots of concerns around maintenance. Do we make sure we do the critical maintenance as well as preventative maintenance? Because we knew we were going to open again sometime.
Okay.
So with that, it was really a function of how do we keep them safe. So we made sure we had the 6-foot social distancing. We had to really manage mask wearing and those kinds of things, because of people who are working in shops, it doesn't take much for one person to get sick and get spread very fast. And so it did require our shop staff to work differently so we can keep the distancing and minimize not only who gets sick, but actually our biggest issue was the quarantining. If someone gets sick, you can have a whole shop that gets quarantined very fast.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of work to manage that. Our shop staff did a really good job of creating new ideas on how to do their morning shop talks, how to transfer information, how to leverage technology, all those things. We laid the framework at a senior level, but our shop staff are the ones who found ways to execute it, and we've had really good success with that. So no issues with our unions here at Northwestern.
That's great to hear, Kevin. Thank you so much. And it's nice to hear how your shop teams leaned right into that. And, it's the front line. It can come up with solutions that we'd never even think of, right? Just amazing. So, Dan, I'm going to go to you on this one. And Keith, I think you're in the middle of this, but for those going to full classroom occupancy, are you considering any 3-foot distancing? Are you relinquishing that? I think, Keith, you may be in that, but Dan, you want to tackle this first. If so, how is it being measured? Where are you headed?
Right now, we are headed back to full capacity. So based on herd immunity and what the state is saying, where we're at, and the CDC guidelines, we're going to go right back to full capacity.
Okay. And are you doing any of that? When you do that, you're not going to go to any distancing, right? Because you have the benefits. It's one of your possibilities that you get. The many possibilities open up, right? Okay, good, excellent. Correct. Keith, you want to lean into that too, because I think you did go from 6 to 3, if I recall. And this is a question that's coming up. And how are you measuring it? Somebody specifically wanted to know, were you doing it from the center spot? And I'll look at that in a second. John Morris is doing this to me. He wants to know if you calculated from the center of the chair, you know how we do this, from the center of the chair, or if you're measuring from edge of the chair. Okay, so Keith, you're on.
So Mr. Morris, we did belly button to belly button. So center of the chair to center of the chair. And so so for the summer, we're doing 3-foot. Distancing, and I think we'll probably be back to what Dan mentioned would be normal, normal seating in the fall. I will say the harder part, you may be experiencing this, but the harder part is for fixed seating. That becomes a little bit more challenging than your typical tablet armchair, where you've got fixed tables or fixed desks that you really can't move. Yeah. Then that becomes a little bit more, there's not an aisle space in between or things of that nature. But yeah, so I think we're aiming to be back exactly where Dan referenced earlier. And I think we're working towards that as well.
Okay, good. So I'm also now, the Smithsonian has an interest as they migrate from full COVID protective measures back to a more friendly normal. We will likely allow public access without face covers before we allow staff to doff the mask, okay? So as you're hearing this, I'd love for one or all of you to think about it. Are any of the academic community using this bifurcated approach to relax requirements? Keith, I think you may have mentioned before about dealing with guests. I think that Dan, you said that. But as you're thinking about it, any of you want to jump in on this one? I'm looking at all of you and looking to see.
I think I can speak to the fact that it's again community driven. It's not just campus driven. And we will always have those one-offs. I mean, if in facilities we don't have one-offs, I don't know where there are one-offs. There will be special situations that will have to be evaluated as they come up. But in general, looking at just the community herd immunity achievement, I think we are probably not going to have to deal with those as time goes on.
Okay. Any other?
Yeah, I mean, for our visitors, they show up on campus and they, you know, it is what it is. It's very much like, it's kind of like the supermarket effect where, you know, if you're vaccinated, you walk in and you can walk in without a mask if that's allowed at your state or whatever. And if you're not vaccinated, you wear a mask. And so that's kind of what, that's not an official policy of our institution, but that's kind of what we've decided with, and that's what it really feels like to me, because, you know, you need your admission stores to continue, you need your business partners to be on campus especially this group, right? For various things. So that's the mindset we're at. No, I will say we are talking a little bit more about athletics and large groups as those get going. You know, we're in Connecticut, so we're based between Boston and New York, and you know, you turn on the TV and you got 16,000 people at Boston Garden, you got 16,000 people at the Islanders game on Long Island. So I think I almost think it's a little bit of a mindset as people get a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more comfortable. We're going to get there, but I'm pretty sure all 16,000 people that didn't go to the Boston Garden to watch the Celtics play were vaccinated, A, and B, had their vaccination card before they got into the space, right? So, yeah. So I mean, that's kind of where we are with visitors and people showing up on campus.
Okay, very good. So I had an interesting one. Said, is anyone allowing overnight campers on campus this summer? Overnight campers, anybody? Okay, so good.
No.
No. Okay.
We have, yep, here at Williams, we do have some summer conferences happening this year. The Williamstown Theater Festival is on campus, but they have a Actors Equity Union, and their rules are behind where Massachusetts is. So that's a fully vaccinated company. So that's how we sort of landed on that. And then we are asking for some the smaller groups to be fully vaccinated.
Okay, very good. So there's one here about, are you seeing resistance in administrative staff coming back to work or wanting to work 100% remote or more than 50%? And I see, Keith, we've had this conversation, have we not? I'm getting everybody's leaning into this one. Kevin, are you seeing that at all?
We are. I don't think we're unique to any other university or to any business in general. I think we've got some who can't wait to get back to the office. They're running out of their house and they can't wait. We have some who have been in the office all along at different levels, and we have some who want a flexible schedule and some who don't want to come back at all. And for all different sorts of reasons, good and bad. But I think we have the full gamut, as many of you have as well. Our current policy is that all university faculty and staff will be back on campus at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is the school year, many of which are expected to slowly ramp up during the summer, which is really considered, probably late July, August. And each school or unit will figure out how they're going to do their own return to campus plans in terms of the ramp up or the flexibility. The university has provided some guardrails around what flexibility looks like, because that can go to different extremes as well, and who gets to make those decisions. So the bottom line is the campus expects everyone to come back to campus, with some exceptions, as we've all mentioned before, and we'll manage it. All my colleagues that I speak to that, again, are in whether in hospital or oil and gas or manufacturing, they're all having similar kinds of issues, and they're all dealing with them in different ways. Some are providing lots of flexibility. Some are saying you never have to come back, and some are saying 100% return to the office by a certain date, and there's zero flexibility. So I think we'll see how it plays out, which is why I think we'll also be in that do, learn, do as we go back. But that's where we're at. We've got the full gamut, but the university is pretty clear that back to campus is the expectation.
Got it. We're going to have some policies that are going to have to be put in place. Keith, you smiled too much. I'm going to have to ask you to speak.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's right. I mean, you've been told for 15, 16 months to act a certain way and do a certain thing every single day. You've been programmed to think one thing. And now, because you got 2 shots in your arm, you're just supposed to forget about 16 months ago and just go, okay. And that is, you know, for everybody most likely that's listening and most likely on the panel for sure, you've gone to work every single day. Or, you know, like I didn't catch up on Netflix. Like I've been sitting at this Viewpoint every single day, right? Like people reference all these shows. I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't see those. Yeah. You know, so I wasn't, and right, but which is to say that everybody has a different ability to turn on that light switch or turn off that light switch, depending on how you want to look at it, and come back to work. But similar to what Kevin said, I think our human resources group is going to be doing the same exact thing with a return to work policy, and all those policies that we created are now going to be modified probably back to work. It does present an interesting opportunity though, where if you're space challenged, right, now there are some functions that can work from home very nicely and perhaps not having a great impact. I think schools and universities will look at those things going forward and say, okay, I won't even make up a department, but X department can work from home and they can do it very efficiently, and we can use that space for a new lab or a new whatever, insert your need. And so, yeah, but I mean, the reprogramming of people that it's okay. I just had a conversation earlier this morning. You know, we're talking about these plastic shields that we've got up, right? So my admin, who's vaccinated and unvaccinated, I'm talking to her through a mask, through a shield, through her mask, because that's what we've done for the last 15 months. Is that really necessary now, right, in our environment? And so that's why I chuckle, because it's those things that people have been doing all along that now they're just supposed to forget about and rely on the science, right? So anyway.
It is not going to change, and I think it's a super important message that it's not going to change rapidly. We had to shift rapidly, but this comeback piece and everything we're doing is going to take some time, and we need to think about that. Kevin, comment.
I think Lily had his hand up, so let Lily go, and I'll follow up after.
Yeah, I was just going to make a point to follow up on Keith's point about space constraints. Absolutely agree with that, that once we have that, what we have seen, that we believe that remote work was not an option, we've learned that it is an option. It's a viable option. In fact, in addition to space availability, we also have the staffing thing that is sitting right in front center of our opportunity here. So what we've also learned is we don't necessarily have to recruit and relocate people to our campus, depending on obviously their job profile, but there may be opportunities for certain types of job where talent is hard to acquire, and maybe not in Kevin's case because he lives in Chicago, but a lot of our other campuses where there is not as much talent available within the small cities that our campuses are in, where you could actually hire somebody that is living in Chicago or living in Seattle or whatever big city that you want to fill in that space. We may have that opportunity now that people can either fly in on a quarterly basis and have a hot desk and go back to their home and be fully productive. I will tell you, my personal preference is being in office. In fact, we just wrapped up our Academy on Campus Level 3 yesterday, and I believe Paula and Chuck flew in for their first in-person training after 15 months. And doing that exercise in person did have a high level of value compared to doing it virtually in the past. So there's definitely those accidental collisions, I think is one of the terms we have used in the past, and those creative exercises that don't happen virtually. So there's definitely value in these things. So we'll have to just figure out how this morphs into the future of our workspaces.
Yeah, and it's going to be about culture. What's your culture? That's the one-off again, and how you form that community is going to be really critical here. And it's also going to be about talent management and how you go after that. But if you're somewhat virtual, you may find in those that you're able to hire people that will never come to your campus because you're going to do that virtually. So some really, really interesting approaches. And I think, Keith, you mentioned it when you talked about innovation and creativity. with the students in mind and thinking about how can we do this, because we may find that we now have a global community of students we could never access before, because they now can come to us remotely, and that augments not just financially, but the richness of the community. So there's so many good things. And Jeff Pierce, you mentioned these in the question and answer section. He was talking about some of these things. So I hope we're getting some responses to you already, Jeff, on this. I want to go to Kevin before I don't have any more time. Kevin, you were going to make a comment as well.
I think we've learned a lot through this. I think one of the things we've discovered is that a lot of our transactional and tactical activities can be done remotely and pretty efficiently. What we're really losing out is the strategic conversations and the strategic activities. That has not flowed nearly as well on a remote environment. We do have the conversations, but there's something to be said about having a face-to-face conversation. And so we're starting to see that play out as we move out of COVID, because COVID had us all in a very tactical mindset. And as we begin to slowly move out of that, we're seeing the impact of not having those strategic engagements that are face-to-face as opposed to having to schedule Zoom calls. We've also seen it be a struggle for those who were hired during the pandemic. So onboarding has been an issue. They haven't had those relationships, and it's not so easy to develop relationships over a video conference with people. So that'll all improve. That said, the virus hasn't gone away, right? The virus is still here. We do not have herd immunity in most places. Although Evanston has a very high vaccination rate, the reality is a lot of people don't live in Evanston. They live in other places and come into the community. And so I think, again, part of our do, learn, do, while we're reverting back to previous standards for the most part, including returning to campus, I think we'll have to also recognize that COVID is still here, and I don't think it's going anywhere. And we'll have to manage how we live with that, just like we've had to live with other viruses as we go forward. So it'll be a managed process, I think, but
it will be
to move in.
It will be. And any of you removing plexiglass, lots of people are keeping plexiglass. There's a debate, a Japanese study that I'm being reminded of here. But can you raise your hands? Anybody keeping plexiglass for those, even in those first contacts? Okay, very good. All right.
For now.
Yeah, for now. Okay, for now. And there is some debate over that, but so we're getting an answer here. Tony Guerrero was asking about that. And most are doing the student element of this, and then they're debating whether the staff and faculty are all coming back vaccinated or not. That's a big debate. And this whole remote piece is also a big debate around that. So, so I want to do one last one, and it's around those that do not have mechanical ventilation. And so they're in a standalone setup. So have you found that there are concerns around localized airflow effects of standalone filtration? Any of you? Or do you find that that's just if you don't have it? I'm getting a nod, no. If you don't have it, you don't have it, and you use standalone devices, correct? Am I correct about that?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Well, we are getting to that witching hour, and I'm going to take us to always way more questions than we have time for. We hope that we've answered some of them in the panel members' comments, and also we will get answers to the questions if we did not get to address them. So please do not worry. We will make sure we do that. And I do so appreciate this panel for all that you had to say. And if I advanced the ball too quickly, the members did it, because it was the member survey that I was recounting, and they are pretty darn smart people, as we learned. And so I was very pleased to have the opportunity to deliver what the members were telling us in that good survey. So please take note of and register for APPA's upcoming BFS. We would love to have all of you there for the July 20 to 22 event. It's APPA's annual meeting. Yes, it's virtual. And we have an app for that, APPA 365. Use it. That's another way to foment the community and stay connected 24/7. We have a slide on resources, and again, we're going to do another town hall, but it will occur after Labor Day, September 27. It's going to be on connection, space, and place. Really, really important topic, as I mentioned earlier. Look at him. He's got it up there and an app for that. Good job, Keith. Okay. So I just found out yesterday that France is sending a second Statue of Liberty to the U.S. This new bronze statue, nicknamed the Little Sister, is 1/16 the size of the world famous one that stands on Liberty Island. It's 992 pounds in weight, just shy of 10 feet tall, an exact replica of the original 1878 plaster model that was preserved at the Arts Museum in Paris, France. So it is leaving Paris for New York City ahead of Independence Day, our July 4th, a gift from France to America. It will first be displayed on Ellis Island, just across the water from the original, and will then stay in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. The statue symbolizes freedom and the light around all the world. The administrator for the Arts Museum in Paris, Olivier Ferrand, said, "We want to send a very special and simple message. Our friendship with the United States is very important, particularly at this moment. We have to conserve and defend our friendship." I think that's a beautiful and touching example for all of us. Let's focus on love, not hate. Let's focus on what unites us, not what divides us. Let's take care of each other. Frankly, the vaccines and the science behind them have led us to this point. Take care of your loved ones and all those around you. Get vaccinated. All right. Thanks. A big thank you to all our panel today. You were wonderful as always. And thank you all for the opportunity to serve you. Have a good day and a great weekend. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.